Nonbelievers. Oh, someone remembers. All right. People of great faith. Prophets of a greater love. I really do believe that. I believe that we are people of great faith and prophets of a greater love. And I hope that you do too. When some people look at the world, all they see is human wretchedness. Everywhere they turn, they see sin and take this as evidence of our fallen nature. And they believe that our sin is so great that only God can save us. And we're not Pollyanna about the world. We see, we understand, we can identify the struggles that we face, but we still have hope. Despite all of the, did I just hear a snicker? We do, we still have hope. Despite all of the evidence of human failure, we still believe in goodness. We still believe that compassion and care and love can help nurture humanity into health. We don't live with any illusions about this being easy, but we hold on to this belief, and for that I'm really grateful. I'm grateful to belong to a movement of believers that holds love as the teaching. We don't always call ourselves believers. It's sometimes an uncomfortable label for ourselves, but I really wish we would give it some time and consideration that we are, in fact, believers. For our final sermon series of the year, I'm returning to some of the themes and ideas that I preached about in an effort to reflect on the journey that we have shared together for the last 9 months. For me, ministry and preaching in particular isn't about coming up with an interesting idea each week. What I do, or what I try to do anyway, is not about entertainment. It's not entertainment. I don't give talks. I know some of you guys are like, that was a great talk. I don't give talks, right? Not that those things are bad, but that's not what I'm trying to do. Talks are for lecture halls, right? I give sermons. And I understand my role as someone who is trying to create a storyline for a community to follow. Human beings are storytelling creatures. We make meaning out of stories. And in some places, the storytellers use an established text to give the story context, right? We know what, texts all over the place. But we know that there is, or we don't know. We believe, we believe that there is no independent ontological truth, right? A truth that stands alone and apart in the world. That is a truth that is unmoving and unchanging, right? That's not a story from our community. And we know that even the communities that do use these texts vary widely in their outlook and action. And I'm not saying that that's bad, but I'm just saying that it's one of the reasons that as Unitarian Universalists, we understand ourselves as part of what is called a living tradition. We are a part of a living tradition. It is a tradition that is shaped by the culture around us. It is shaped by what we are moving through. Always. It is alive. And each of us has a role in shaping that tradition, right? I have this role, they have this role, you have another role. And sometimes I think of my role as a modern expression of a very old tradition. Right? Now we sit in spaces like this, but we used to sit around the fire. And there were stories that were told that gave shape to the tribe or the clan. And those stories gave that group meaning and purpose. Right? This is the tradition. And some of what I do, and some of what Mark does, and some of what Laura is doing with the children, and some of what you do when you talk about this place with friends and strangers, is that we tell stories so that we know who we are and what we value, so we know what actions we are supposed to take in the world. We tell stories so we know who we are and what we value, so we know what actions we are supposed to take in the world. And while it may not have been entirely obvious, or even obvious at all, the sermon arc this year, from September to now, was designed to guide us from leaving behind a story of what others say about us. That we are non-believers, that we are a club, that we are too intellectual. And it went through stories of responsibility and generosity and love and ultimately sacrifice so that we can live into what we are being called to do in this world. We cannot become the heroes that this world needs us to be if we cannot see our mission, if we cannot learn how to sacrifice for that mission. And it's not enough to hang out on top of a lovely but isolated mountaintop, believing in the goodness of humanity like some guru. Right? We are Unitarian Universalists. And what that means is we are called to be in the world. We are called to be in the world loving the world. We're called to be caring for the tender and vulnerable hearts, to be nurturers of the dreams of the people who are afraid and isolated. Too many people think that no one sees them, that no one has their back. And we know this because they've decided to be for themselves. And so they hoard, or they drive aggressively, or they go to war because they believe that there isn't enough for everyone. But we know that this is like going to the beach and believing that there won't be enough sun for everyone just because it's a little bit crowded. There is enough sun for everyone. We know there is enough if we are willing to allow love to be the teaching. And you are the hands and the hearts of love. I am just the storyteller. You are the hands and the hearts of love. And the world is not waiting for me. The world is waiting for you. But before we can know what that means, we have to acknowledge that we do, in fact, believe something. And that our faith is not only real, it's transformative. And this is why way back in August, my first sermon as your called minister, as your newest storyteller in this line of storytellers, I preached that sermon, Hello, Nonbelievers, as an entreaty, as an appeal, as a call for you to allow your faith to impinge on you, to hold you accountable as a believer. The Christian tradition has defined the term believer as someone who thinks that sins are redeemed only through a sacrifice on the cross. And if you don't think that's true, then you are a non-believer. It's a binary framework that forces us to accept that worldview as the truth. But then, many in that tradition, not all, but many in that tradition went a little further and sought to define being a believer using homophobia and racism and patriarchy and misogyny and anti-Semitism and Islamophobia. And they propped up gospels of prosperity while shaming the poor. And when we were forced into that binary of choices, many of us looked at the option and said proudly, if that's what being a believer means, then no thank you. I choose non-believer. But the binary is false. And I'm tired of having our legitimacy as believers measured against a text and a tradition that we don't believe in. We are believers. We believe in the inherent worth and dignity of every being, not that some are privileged and others are not. We believe in the interwovenness, that we are interwoven with the planet, not owners of it with dominion over it. We believe in the freedom of responsibility, in equality, and in justice. These are faith statements. These are faith statements because you could look out and decide it's different than that. We don't, because this is what we believe. We are believers. And it's important for us to own our story, whether you tell it the way that I tell it or not, because the story we tell about ourselves helps us understand who we are and what we value, so we know what actions we are supposed to take in the world. And when we accept other people's definitions of who we are, when we internalize their definitions of us, we begin to believe that we are not people of great faith. And that's a shame, because the world needs more Unitarian Universalists right now, not fewer. Are we the right answer for everyone? No. Do we always live up to our values? Oh, hell no. But we're trying, right? We're trying. Like Rumi says to us, come again and again. We're not wanderers in a caravan of despair. We try again and again. Even if we've broken our vows 1,000 times, we come again and again, trying constantly to return to those values. And we believe in the goodness of humanity, and we believe in hope, and the world needs to hear much more of that right now. Even if we do it imperfectly, there are people who need to hear that story, and sometimes their very lives depend on it. I mean that with all sincerity. Their very lives depend on it. And they don't need it to hear it from me. They need to hear it from you. Because you are the hands and the hearts of love. I am the storyteller around this little campfire. You are the apostles of the brighter future. The impact that you can have on the world is far greater than anything that I could ever hope to imagine, if you are willing to believe that you are the apostles of love and hope. Now, one of the struggles Unitarian Universalists face worshiping within a living tradition, one of the struggles we face as people who don't use a text as a guidepost for interpreting our context, is that we need to create stories that make sense to us. And one of the reasons you hired me, aside from the fact that I've got good stoles, right, is you hired me to tell you stories. Stories to help the members of this church understand who we are and what we value, so we know what actions we're supposed to take in the world. Now, there are storytellers on a national level right now who are also working through telling a story as a denomination, who we are. There were 4 people, actually, who went to that national storytelling thing that happened downtown last night. I did not go, because you're better people than me. But how many people, by a raise of hands, have heard of the process called Article 2? All right, a few. It's good that most of you didn't raise your hand, because I have a whole couple paragraphs talking about what it is, and that would be super awkward if everybody raised their hand. I don't know, I'd probably get lost in here. Article 2. We are what's called a covenantal faith. We are a covenantal faith, and this means that we create covenants, which is a really nice way of saying agreements. We create covenants that guide how we belong to one another, that tell us how we want to behave with one another. And we read our covenant every Sunday. And these aren't just poetic words. These are the distilled values and vision of this congregation. And sometimes, we just go right through it and maybe we don't even think about it that much. But it is the distilled set of values and vision for this congregation. And our covenant tells us how we want to belong to one another. Now, ours is similar to covenants that you see in other UU churches, for obvious reasons. But ours was adapted for us because it needed to represent this context and this group of people. And right now, at the national level, they're reevaluating their covenant, the national covenant. And part of that covenant is called the principles and the purposes. And some of you are familiar with this. There are how many principles? Wow, depends on who you are. That's good. Technically, there are 7, with a movement to add an 8th one, right? And you might be surprised to learn that originally there were only 6. In 1961, when the Unitarians and the Universalist denominations merged, they did so guided by 6 principles. And these were rewritten in 1985, partly because we needed to change some of the language. It included things like the dignity of man, right? They meant humanity, but that's just not the way we speak anymore. We spoke that way in 1961, or some of us anyway. And now we don't speak that way anymore. And because we are part of a living tradition, we are not beholden to a text being true all the way through history, right? So we can change it. And also, some of that stuff just felt dated. So now, in 1985, they updated it to 7 principles. And these have been with us for 40 years, which, to some people, it feels as if, they've been there forever, right? Like Moses gave them to us, because they've only been members for 20 years. So, that's all they've ever known. Article 2 states that every 15 years, as part of our process of being in a living tradition, is that we have to go back and look at the principles and purposes and determine if they are still appropriate for our context. Do they still work for us? Do they still tell our story? And so right now, they're in a revision process, and they've been doing this for the last couple of years, and they have a proposal that I think is actually going to pass this summer at General Assembly, and it is a reimagining of these 7 guiding values. They are interdependence, pluralism, justice, transformation, generosity, equity, and at the center is love. So imagine a circle, like an egg. Right? And all of these are around it: interdependence, pluralism, justice, transformation, generosity, equity, and at the center is love. This is sort of the graphic that's out there. And the animating force for each of these companion values is love. And as you might imagine, because we are Unitarian Universalists, there have been many emails and many social media posts and many blog essays that have been written in defense and in critique of this new story, some of which I agree with and some of which I don't. But one of the critiques is really worth investigating, partly because it indicts us a little bit. Members of MVUC, right? Some people feel that the new language is too vague and it lacks clarity. And they are animated about one word in particular. I'm going to read them again, and you can tell me which one you think it is, okay? Interdependence, pluralism, justice, transformation, generosity, equity, and love. Equity. It's love. The word that they are most animated about is love. The majority of these comments just feel like that word love is too ambiguous. And I think they come from a genuine place of concern when they ask is, if this is the animating value of our faith, what does love mean? What are we supposed to believe in? And I understand the frustration because sometimes we use words that are so vague, it feels like we are saying something when ultimately we're not. Oh, bless your heart, I love you. Right? And then we debate and debate and debate and debate to the, around the use of language to the point of inaction. And I'm not saying that we don't need to be constantly learning and stretching into new language. We do. The 1961 version of the principles no longer represents us. Right? We understand what the sixth principle of that first set was trying to get at when we read, to encourage cooperation with men of goodwill in every land. But we wouldn't say it that way today. We're part of a living tradition, so we changed the language. But speaking personally, I always found the 1985 version of the principles somewhat incomplete. I believe, you don't have to believe this with me, but I believe in a binding anima. Emerson referred to this as the oversoul. Some people call it God, not an anthropomorphized father in the sky, but something that refers to a mystical intimacy with creation. And there's nothing like that in the 1985 version. They are intentionally very secular, because where the faith was at that moment was very reactive to some of the Christian stuff, right, of the 60s, 50s, 60s, 70s. But there is an increasing number of UUs who want that part of their faith represented more explicitly. So I see the insertion of the word love as a way to give value to that spiritual perspective without having to say the word God. Right? Sits at the center. But what does love mean? And perhaps more importantly, what do we mean? What do we mean when we say love is the teaching of this church? We say it every week. What do we mean by that? Really? It sounds really good. But it's also so vague that maybe we don't ever actually have to figure out what it means to us. And this would be a shame, because more than any set of bylaws or policies, more than any shared story about stained glass or the color of the stage, our covenant lies at the center of our story. Allegedly. It is what we use to guide the stories we tell about who we are and what we value, so we know what actions we are supposed to take in the world. When I hear us say, love is the teaching of this church, I hear a call to commitment. Perfect. That was love on the other end. I hear a call for us to allow our faith to impinge on us, to hold us accountable as believers. That's what I hear. And I suppose I hear it that way because I don't give talks. I don't give talks. This isn't TED, right? What Mark and I try to do each Sunday is not about education or entertainment, right? I give sermons. He provides the music that is there to get at the place that's not on the word level, right? Not on the cognitive level. We work together to create something, a set of spiritual stories designed to support the community so that we might collectively work together to make a transformation in the world. Love is the teaching, and you are the hands and the hearts of love. Love has an expression, and you are it. You are it. The teaching doesn't exist on the page or in some amorphous dimension of thought. It exists as an expression of your actions. And Bonnie Brandt recently came to me to talk about social justice. She's like, what do we do? What are we going to do? And I said, I want easy wins. Really, I want some easy wins. We could use some easy wins here, right? I want to build up our sense of mission and belonging through attainable and meaningful actions that we can all do together. I really want to do a bunch of stuff with you together. And she said, well, what about marching in the DC Pride Parade? I said, oh, that is exactly the type of action that we're supposed to take in the world because we know who we are and we know what we value. It is the manifestation of love is the teaching by the people who are the hands and the hearts of love. So we registered, and our registration comes with 6 seats on a truck. I don't want 6. 6 is, what is that? 6. That's not a very good story. That's not a good story. I want 60. I want 60. I want 60 of us to go. So we put a QR code in the order of service. If you flip it over, you will find the QR code. And for those of you who are listening at home, you can just go to mvuc.org/pride. If you're listening to this later, mvuc.org/pride. But if you're here right now, you can just open your phone, because we've all learned how to do this in COVID, right? And scan the QR code. And at this stage, all we want is a name and email. And if you want to take a break and just scan the code right now and stop listening to me, that's totally fine. We're almost to the end, and you can just skip the rest of the service, and you're like, oh, I'll just sign up right now. June 8th is a Saturday. The Pride Parade is at 3. There's going to be some lineup that goes before it. Not everybody's going to be able to march the 2 miles. We know this. But we still want you to be part of the 60. So what we're going to do is we're going to create 2 groups. There's going to be one group that's marching with the truck. There's some of you who can walk 2 miles, right? And there's going to be another group that's positioned on the side, and they're going to have waters, and they're going to be cheering. And we're going to create these 2 groups. And the next day, Mark pointed this out, the next day we're holding our first Pride Sunday here. So it's like a combined weekend, right? It's also Music Sunday that weekend, and Mark's putting together a set of anthems to celebrate the expression of the teaching that we want to bring to the world. So don't worry about what might hold you back. Just sign up. We'll find a way for everyone to participate. Do not worry. Let's create a story together, a story that shows the world what we believe in, that shows that we are believers. The phrase, love is the teaching, can be so vague, we can say it and never be held accountable for what that means. And frankly, there's just too much of that in the world. There are too many people saying things but then doing something else. Who would we become if 60 of us were out there marching? Right? We are becoming something. We are always becoming something. Is love really the teaching, or is that just something we say? Are we really the hands and the hearts of love, or would we prefer to love the world from the top of a mountaintop, safely? I am just the storyteller. I will be there so I can tell the story later. But for the story to make any sense, we need a hero. And I believe that you are the hero that this world is waiting for. Because we are believers, and we are prophets of a greater love. I hope you'll join us.